last session in this particular bit, we're going to, and we've touched on it briefly, is how do we take on board kind of the non-academic evidence, the local knowledge, the indigenous knowledge. And I'm going to invite Poshendra up to the stage just to talk us through some of that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is Poshendra Satyal, Senior Policy Manager at Birdlife International. So in this presentation, I'm going to talk about some of the ways you can include indigenous people, local communities, as well as in integrating their voices and knowledge in conservation. So just to give you a little bit of information about Birdlife. So we have science and partnership as the two key foundations of Birdlife from the Birdlife 10-year strategy. And we have more than 122 partners worldwide in over 118 countries. And it's science guides pretty much of any conservation activity carry out on the ground. For that, for example, we are the avian authority for the IUCN red list species for birds, so on the species, and we also periodically publish state of the world's bird report as well. In terms of size, we monitor and map key biodiversity areas, KBAs, and also IBAs, important biodiversity areas. And we also look beyond to see some of the systemic drivers of biodiversity loss as well in terms of the system. And in terms of society, we mobilize the policymakers, governments, private actors, as well as the local conservation groups, youth, and general public as well. So the evidence-based concept we want to achieve, and then we understand that we have a very strong science team, and then everything is guided by science. But we have also begun to explore how our partnership is collecting the indigenous knowledge and local knowledge, as well as how they have been incorporating the practitioner knowledge into the conservation. And also this is influenced by various aspects of the ethical, social values. And also, because of if we don't incorporate all of that, then we might have consequences. Some aspect about the evidence complacency in putting the inappropriate solution, and then also inappropriately applied conservation. So on that note, I'm going to focus today on some of the examples from Birdlife International, as well as from Global South, in terms of how we can integrate indigenous knowledge and also the voice of indigenous people in conservation planning and excellence. The work is mostly grounded in a recent study by an MPhil student, David Algray, who interviewed a number of Birdlife partners. But I also draw upon some of the lessons derived from my involvement in some of the projects. For example, the Birdlife-led project on Asia Pacific Forest Governance Project, where we combined community-based forest monitoring beside the remote sensing analysis by our science team, and also other projects. I also build on my various contribution and interest in the area in terms of equalizing conservation. Also, I contributed to the Visions chapter for the IP-based transformative assessment, which looked into how much of the indigenous vision complement is similar or dissimilar with the vision as stipulated in the global biodiversity framework. So just to set the scene in terms of the indigenous people are the distinct social and cultural groups that share collective ancestral ties with the lands and resources, although they are only about 6% of the total population on the earth, but most of the biodiversity, 80% of terrestrial biodiversity is in the lands they live, occupy. Also, our science team and others have also done the overlap between IBAs, KBAs, and IPLCs, and there is significant overlap. In that sense, because they are the owners and custodians of nature, we need to incorporate the plurality of worldviews and their beliefs and so on. So it's also one of the things that I'm going to argue is that we need multiple evidence-based for effective conservation. And then also incorporating indigenous knowledge and local knowledge not only helps in delivering effective conservation, but it also would make conservation evidence more inclusive and equitable as well. So that's one of my arguments here as well. So enhancing we are talking about collecting and using the indigenous knowledge and local knowledge, but one of the important aspects is also to enhance their voice and agency in decision-making structures and processes at all levels. So in that, it goes along the aspect of decolonizing conservation in terms of decolonizing narratives, knowledge, voices, practices, and funding. So some examples from the Birdlife partnership in terms of the way the various partners have been using. The indigenous knowledge and local knowledge. You will see just, for example, one of the example from Burung, Indonesia. So the Burung, Indonesia has been collaborating with local communities and incorporating indigenous law and local knowledge in conservation. For them, conservation is a social movement, and sustainable conservation builds on local partnerships. So that's how they see the value of working with indigenous people and nomadic groups. The other example shows is from our partner in Philippines, the Haribon Foundation. It highlights the importance of some of the enabling policies because in the Philippines, there is a domestic law, the 1997 Indigenous Peoples' Rights Act, and also there has been operationalization of ILO 169 Convention, the UN Declaration of Indigenous People. So there is a separate department under the Ministry of Environment and Natural Resources, which has there is a provision for carrying out free prior informed consent in terms of any conservation projects being developed in the indigenous lands. And the Haribon Foundation works closely with the department as well as some of the indigenous people. And also as part of the process, they participate in their rituals in day-to-day, and that helps in terms of the trust building and building relationships with the local communities. The other example is from the American Bird Conservancy, where there is the American Bird Conservancy is supporting the indigenous kinship circle in the management of central grasslands there. And for them, indigenous resilience is important for ecosystem resilience as well. So it highlights also the importance of community engagement, also learning from the elder teaching and so on. So one of the practical ways and are the tangible ways of supporting the indigenous people and local communities is through the, making sure there is the clarity of tenure, because there are in Paraguay, our partner Guerra Paraguay has provided the historic transfer of land ownership there, and then to the indigenous people, more than 548 hectares of land has been provided to the indigenous people. And this has strengthened their trust and communication with not only the particular indigenous group they have been working, but also with the other indigenous organizations and people there. The other aspect of providing tangible support is the provision of direct access and also dedicated funding to the indigenous people. That's what our partner in Australia, Birdlife Australia, has done because they have set up a separate indigenous grant for bird research and conservation. And this has helped empower indigenous range groups there in conservation. So now I will move to the recently completed project led by Birdlife policy team, and this more looked into the aspect of non-state actors' involvement in forest policy, planning, and monitoring. And we were mainly focused on what we call the 3 C's of forest, so forest cover, assessment of forest cover, forest condition, including the biodiversity content in the forest, as well as forest carbon. And we combined some aspect of community-based forest monitoring besides the remote sensing data analysis by our science team, particularly in forest cover and forest condition. Indigenous people and local communities participated in a number of surveillance activities, and we, with the combined analysis, we produced some of the material for policy advocacy at the regional level, national level, and also that helped in terms of the resource management. One of the interesting aspects of it was whatever we produced from the remote sensing analysis, what we captured at forest loss was actually when we did the ground truthing to community-based forest monitoring, then we found that that was actually the new kind of restored area, so new plantation. So that was quite, eye-revealing for us. So just to give you some examples of how we have adapted the community-based forest monitoring using the assessment method of state pressure and response in different contexts. So for example, in Malaysia, it was mainly used for the monitoring of hornbill species and including their hornbill nests and so on. And that brings to the assessment of the biodiversity, ecosystem assessment, biodiversity surveys, and also looking into the effectiveness of certain tools such as management effectiveness tracking tool or MATE tool. Now I have another example from community forestry in Nepal. That's my home country, and also you can see in the picture is the village I grew up. So community forest user groups have been in operation for many years, starting from the 1980s, and there are more than 22,000 forest user groups in Nepal, which involves more than 1/3 of the population. And this not only helped meet the needs in terms of the forest products, in terms of providing local provision for timber, fuel, wood, and fodder, but also help in local livelihoods. And in terms of the benefits to for the increase in forest cover, and if you can see, there has been an increase from 1992, from 26% to 45% in 2016. And also because about 36% of the population there involves indigenous people, there are a number of other indigenous practices in terms of soil and water conservation, in terms of avoiding wildlife and human conflict and other aspects of in terms of resource management. The other example is from arid and semi-arid regions of Kenya and Ethiopia, where I was involved in a project which looked into how the customary institutions, traditional institutions, are helpful in terms of resource management in the time of the drought and so on. So, for example, in Kenya, there are indigenous customary group which practice zoning system for different seasons, like for wet season, for dry season, and in terms of the drought areas and so on. So they have been now formalized through the Kenya's devolved structure, and then as part of the process, they have emerged as a hybrid institution in terms of managing faster and other. And traditionally, most of these were elder men, but now as part of the formalized process, they have to be more inclusive by including more women and youth as well in the decision-making process. So these are also, how the local county officials and then the government has been helping the revival of the different customary institutions. And also there is a great example of conservancy model of wildlife management in Kenya as well, which our partner, Nature Kenya, has also been promoting. And there are similar kind of customary institutions in Ethiopia as well. The final example comes from Uganda's Batwa Indigenous Group, which highlights how the social, cultural discrimination and lack of political recognition hinder certain groups such as Batwa Indigenous people in terms of decision-making processes around resource management or adaptation responses. Because Batwa lack of voice, agency, and influence. And then this also highlights the importance of political will and also the enabling policies to have them included in any conservation decision-making processes and structures. So just to summarize, as you can see, these different case studies highlight both the opportunities and challenges in terms of embedding indigenous knowledge and local knowledge, as well as voice in conservation. And there is a variety of experience from the Birdlife partners as well as the Global South. some of the key learnings, key aspect insights are that it is important to have clear tenure and then the tenure security, the importance of direct and dedicated funding in people and local communities, importance of enabling policies, legal recognition, and so on. And also the aspect of capacity building, co-learning is equally important. Because we are dealing with the complex socio-ecological system, we need rich and conservation evidence base. So for that, we need to acknowledge the knowledge diversity. So we need to have the practitioner knowledge as well as indigenous people and local knowledge. So the approach should be also in co-learning and capacity building, in the sense that we produce independent researchers from the ground so that they can contribute to the knowledge base as well. And also, when we talk about indigenous knowledge and scientific knowledge and combining this, obviously there are aspects of the, to what extent we can combine, because of the way the knowledge system differ in terms of their nature, as well as the epistemological and cultural mismatch. But I think it is important to explore further which are the areas for convergence and which are the areas of divergence, and also trying to understand the discrepancies so that we can still, we can help in this conservation sector in that sense. Then again, I would like to highlight, it's not just about collecting indigenous and local knowledge. At the same time, what is important is also empowering indigenous people and local communities. In that sense, since the reports are needed to enhance their voice, recognition, and rights in conservation decision-making processes and structures. So thank you very much. I stop my presentation there. And any question, I'm happy to answer.
Thanks, Poshendra. A few questions, and do shout if there's anything online. Yes.
That was really interesting. I was wondering about how climate change changes the goalposts. Like when you're, I guess, kind of a question for everyone, but about like the targets of conservation. Presumably, climate change changes the landscape's going to look like, and therefore, perhaps, I don't know if there are any bird species which you've thought actually we shouldn't be focusing on them because they're screwed or something like that, or like thinking really pragmatically. If this is about thinking pragmatically, are there any species that you just think we shouldn't be focusing on anymore?
I think I can answer broadly, because I need to talk to the science team in terms of what particular species are more vulnerable to climate change. But in terms of the aspect of the systemic, drivers, and that climate change and other external drivers are there, which can affect the conservation as well as in terms of the livelihood of the local and indigenous people and so on. So when we talk about the indigenous knowledge and so on, I was talking of the pastoralists in Kenya and Ethiopia. Their livelihood often has also changed because there is more migration. Like, for example, I was researching in the Borana communities, Ethiopia, and they have been migrating towards Sudan, Kenya, and so on. These sorts of water and water scarcity has hampered their livelihood as well. So, like in 10 years before, like people with 100 livestock used to be called somebody with in a kind of modern sense rich, but now even having 20, 30 cattle, camel is considered rich. So those kind of social perception and things have also changed. And obviously, in terms of the other aspect, climate change is adding more burden to their livelihoods, and also conservation action is also hampered. So for particular impact to the birds, I can guide you to some of the people that you can talk to.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Poshendra. I'm going to a very quick question from the gentleman.
I don't know how quick it is, Stephen from Limo. I take the example of the Batwa in Uganda, and obviously for these people, indigenous people, the main concern is livelihood and food security. Food security mainly via hunting of wild meat or bush meat. Conservation obviously comes from a very, very different angle, and that creates quite a strong tension between food security, hunting of wild meat, which has very, very dramatic consequences, and conservation. How does fit evidence-based conservation into this framework of tensions?
So obviously, there are the Batwa indigenous group, which has been supported by, for example, our partner there, Nature Uganda, like in the Magahinga Gorilla National Park, just after, there's Batwa indigenous group live in the settlements just outside of that. And then also in terms of when I went there, then at the time when the Ichua forest reserve was being created, they're looking into some of the livelihood options as well. So, more providing livelihood options, like, they were helped in terms of beekeeping, animal rearing, and some of the helping with in terms of the farm production, in terms of agricultural output and so on. So obviously, we can look into how there is also, aspect of how we can also look into the sustainable harvesting of some of the, like some hunting and so on, like in terms of the what is sustainable hunting and those kind of aspects as well. There is a, other discussion, but Nature Uganda has been supporting in terms of other sustainable livelihood options. Help food security.
Thank you. Thanks very much.